I would like to introduce our first panel. So we are very lucky today to have sort of some amazing people to hear from. Our thought in framing the day on thinking forward about what is framing our future and the emerging trends and opportunities, we thought was important for two major reasons for the after-school field. And one is that all of us need to understand sort of the environment in which we're operating, how that might affect funding, how that might think about the needs of our schools and communities, how that feels for families and young people in our programs, and what, in effect, some of the future might hold. But importantly, all of us are working with young people who are going to be entering the workforce in 5, 10, 15 years. And for many of us, we don't have the opportunity to hear from some of the experts on what that world might look like. And what are some of the skills that they'll need to have? What are some of the aspects of their development that will need to be emphasized? How we think about what the characteristics are for someone who will be able to be successful in this emerging world. And to that end, we've invited Jonathan Boles, who is the Executive Director for the Center for an Urban Future, to join us, as well as Fatima Shama, who is Executive Director of the Fresh Air Fund, to get some of their thoughts, both as a leadership perspective, but also on a research perspective of kind of what's happening in the city of New York. Moderating this panel will be an old friend, but a new dean of the City College's Colin Powell School for Civic and Global Leadership. And I am delighted to welcome Andy, Fatima, and Jonathan to the stage. Thank you.
Good morning. Hi there. How are you? I'm Andy Rich from City College, and it's great to be with you. It is wonderful to have so many folks together this morning to have this conversation about some of the emerging trends that relate to the young people of New York City and the kind of programs that are required and become imperative for us as we serve next generations of New Yorkers. And I'm thrilled that we have our two panelists, and so I want to spend most of the time giving them the chance to share their wisdom with you. We've been asked to talk about emerging trends and really to think about this from the perspective of workforce development in particular, but we'll look at it more broadly than that as well. And so, but to get us started, you've got their bios in your conference book, but I thought it would be nice if they might each just introduce themselves and say a little bit about what their organizations do and how their organizations connect to the work that's so important to all of you. So Fatima, do you want to go first?
Sure. Good morning. So I'm delighted to be here. The first thing I want to tell you all are that you are awesome, and you truly make a difference in the lives of young people. As a young person born and raised in the Bronx, who really had the chance to be in an after-school program with caring adults who helped me see things beyond my neighborhood, I'm delighted to be back in that space serving the communities in our city. So if no one has told you how awesome you are yet, I wanted to start by saying that. So thank you. Thank you for doing what you do for our young people in our city. I have the pleasure of running the Fresh Air Fund today. The Fresh Air Fund, as many of you may know or have heard of, have been a part of, has been around for a long time. We are in our 143rd summer. Our relationship with children starts in the summer. For 143 years, we have cared about the summer and the reality that summer matters. And it matters because of unstructured time and what that means for our kids. It started as a public health solution, and now I believe we remain in that vein. We can talk more about that. But the ability to connect young people to opportunities to explore and to be children and to meet new people and see new places truly can re-energize them and re-energize them to be back in the school community. The organization, I would say, is, as I'm there in my 4th year, we're focused on the future and focused on how do we really truly invest in our young people, and so I'm really excited to be a part of today's conversation.
All right, good morning, everyone. I want to thank Allison and everyone from PASE for putting this together, for having me here. Thank you. You do great work. I'm Jonathan Boles. I run the Center for an Urban Future, which is a policy organization, a think tank, that tries to shine a light on some important opportunities and challenges facing our city. We are focused on New York City, and we look at issues around economic opportunity in New York City. So for instance, we've done research really raising the visibility of issues like the promise of apprenticeships in New York City, the opportunity to expand the number of low-income entrepreneurs, people that could get on a pathway to economic opportunity with entrepreneurship. We've written about the important role that community colleges play in today's economy, but also shined a light on the need to improve graduation rates at those community colleges. We've looked at how important workforce development is, job training programs, workforce preparation, but also the need to make sure we improve and expand those workforce efforts. And so many other things that we've done to really look at how do we get people on the paths to prosperity in New York. A lot of our issues have led to city or state policies, and the goal of our research is not to have reports that sit on shelves, but to really partner with community-based organizations to give organizations in the field ammunition for them to advocate for solutions and to also give our ideas to policymakers at the city and state level so they can run with them and implement smarter policies for strengthening our communities. Thank you.
So let me ask you, now that you know a little bit about who we've got here, maybe ask each of you to say a word about, based on the work you do, what you see as sort of the emerging challenges for young people in New York City, for education, for after school. Jonathan, for you, perhaps as it pertains to research a little bit more and what you're finding in research across those areas. And Fatima, for you, I'd be curious if you might expand a little bit on how all of those things relate to kind of the evolution of the Fresh Air Fund, right? Would you say from starting as a public health matter to something that's at least that, but more probably today?
Do you want to set the stage a bit? Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing that concerns me the most is just that the economy is changing. And I think that young people are going to have to make changes to make sure they have opportunities to rise up into the middle class, to prosper in a very different economy today. And I think all of us, city and state leaders, but also folks in the room today, community-based organizations, we need to really understand these trends. Let me give you a little bit of context, a little bit of statistics. I mean, I think that right now we're in an economy in New York City that's probably looking just at job creation is maybe the best ever. We're at an all-time high for jobs in New York City. The unemployment rate is around 4% or below. Really amazing improvement on those measures over the last 10 or 20 years. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of jobs have been created in the last decade. But things are changing, and there's a lot more hurdles to get on the path to good jobs and middle-class lives. And I think that few groups have probably fared worse in today's economy than young adults. Nationally, in the year 2000, 45% of teens were working. Around now, it's 30%. The unemployment, as I said, nationally is under 4%. For young adults, it's about 17%. There are a lot of factors that go into that. One of them is that I think more and more of the good jobs out there are requiring post-secondary credentials or some post-secondary education. I'm not saying that there aren't other options out there, but in the Great Recession, just about all, or since the Great Recession, just about all of the jobs that were lost were for those holding a high school degree or less. About 3/4 of the jobs gained since the Great Recession were for those having a bachelor's degree or higher. We've done some analysis of this in New York looking ahead, and the trends are only going to get stronger. For instance, we did an analysis, we're doing an analysis of where we looked at all of the occupations in New York City. Then we kind of zeroed in on all of the occupations that are growing the fastest and pay $50,000 or more. 9 of those 10 fastest growing occupations that pay at least $50,000 require a bachelor's degree, or at least generally go to folks with a bachelor's degree. And the other 1 out of the 10 generally goes to folks with an associate's degree. So things are really changing out there. I think that the good news is that we've got a lot more young people that are getting a high school diploma these days. The numbers of folks graduating high school in New York City have really continued to increase for about a decade now. That's great news. More young people are enrolling in public education in New York City. That's great news. I think the big problem, and something that we've tried to focus attention on, is that far too few of the people that are enrolling in CUNY are actually completing college, getting a credential. Citywide, when you just look at the community colleges at CUNY, about 22% of those who enroll in the community colleges get a credential within 3 years. If you kind of take it out to like 6 years, it's just a little bit higher. But the reality is we have so much more work to do to make sure in this economy, when a college credential has become so much more important, that more of our young people are not only enrolling, but able to persist and get some kind of credential, whether it's a certificate or an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. And lastly, and I think we'll probably get into this in a little while, but in addition to everything I just said, there are some changes that are coming down the pike with regard to automation that are only going to magnify the problems. We're going to see some entry-level jobs go away or no longer be created to the same level as before. If you've gone into a McDonald's recently, you've probably seen that a lot of people, most people, are ordering from a kiosk, not from a cashier. There are fewer people at the counter at McDonald's than ever before. We're seeing this at all sorts of frontline retail, restaurant jobs, and that's going to only continue. More and more, the good-paying jobs in the economy are requiring some kind of post-secondary credential and increasingly some kind of tech competency.
So I want to take this back. To get there, we need happy and healthy children, right? We need to invest in our kids so that they can know what they don't know. If we want them to be on a path to pursuing careers, they need exposure, right? It's summertime. It's what the Fresh Air Fund does. If any of you have children, you know what you've tried to put together for your children this summer. Perhaps you've signed them up for things where they can be in a dance program or do coding or try a new sport, or maybe you've patched together a summer experience where they're in day camp and then they go to something else and maybe they visit a family abroad, or the families you're working with have this experience, right? So to me, the reality of the challenges where our young people are facing happen to be pressure, right? Because our young people are not given the space and the chance, perhaps, to be children. And I think that as once a policymaker, now a provider, once a provider on your side, a mother, a daughter of immigrants who tried to patch that all together and happily opened up pumps for my summer experience and went to the library and ate free breakfast and free lunch. All good, right? The reality is, I didn't know what I didn't know. So I didn't know what jobs I could pursue, right? My community, I didn't know what was available to me. I saw what I saw. So in the summer, when our kids have the opportunity, or should have the opportunity, to be connected to seeing things, trying things, meeting new friends, you are all providing that, right? How do we sustain that? How do we sustain the opportunity for our children to be healthy socially, emotionally? When we talk about what skills they're going to need to thrive, either in high school or in college, it has everything to do with curiosity. It has everything to do with persistence, right? If our kids don't have the chance to build that stamina of curiosity, then we're setting them up for failure, right? Those of you working with young people know that you're seeing the rising rates of what stress means to them, right? Whether it's the political climate and the language of attack on each and every one of our communities and identities, whether it's, quite honestly, what you perceive to be safety is not so safe, right, for our young people. These realities are affecting them in ways that I would say as a provider we are seeing, right? To see our young people come in with more suicidal ideation is incredibly worrisome. So I want them on the pathway to college, but I have to think about how are we investing in children today, right? How are we investing in their health and well-being today? And I say that as a parent who knows what I want for my children, right? We have got to live in a world where I want for every child in this city what I would want for my own, which would mean that they get to smile and giggle and laugh and have memories and try new things, so that when the time comes for them to apply to one of our over 400 high schools, that may very well be a high school for broadcasting, a high school for media, high school for American Studies at Lehman. Maybe I want to take a specialized high school. Maybe I want to apply to Bard. Maybe I want to go to the high school for architecture and engineering. You actually know what those things are. When do our young people get exposed to those things so that when they're applying, they can actually turn to their parent and say, I really want to try that, right? The application process encourages our kids to visit 21 different schools. Say what? 21 different schools? You can list 12. Okay, how? How do our kids get exposed? How do our families get exposed to knowing what those options are, right? How are we in this space creating that opportunity? So for me, I think the out-of-school time picture is incredibly important in really adding to that investment in our young people. But to get to what Jonathan is talking about, which is the future of where our young people need to be prepared, for me, I see this as a challenge. There's a disconnect. We aren't coordinated, and we're forgetting what matters, right? I did policy in New York City government. I know about outcomes. I know about graduation rates. I also know about real outcomes, right? What does critical thinking look like? What does curiosity look like? What does communication look like? How do we engage our young people today in experiences and opportunities that allows them to be more informed and more excited about that next step, right? This goes to the workforce piece. How do we set them up to be curious about working, to go pursue something that they want? Some of us have to do it because we have to be part of our family's income stream, right? Let's not ignore that. But maybe we can connect the dots a bit. This city has a lot of money, and there's a whole lot of talented people. We could figure this out. So to me, that's a bit of the challenge that I think we're facing with our young people. How do we invest in them today so that we can get to this healthy tomorrow?
So I wonder if you might take a try at answering the very question you just posed to us, right? So there is we've just put a huge set of responsibilities at your feet as folks who are focused in investing in young people. But I wanted to pick up on this kind of social and emotional health, the curiosity. How do we get them prepared to engage the world as they inherit it? And what have you seen that works? And how has the Fresh Air Fund perhaps adapted over the years to serve that mission in the 21st century? Or where have you seen across the city other kind of efforts underway that really are making a difference?
Yeah. So I'll share some of our work and some of the work I know that happens across the city, and then I know, Jonathan, you've studied a lot of this too. So I said the Fresh Air Fund started in response to a public health crisis, right? So 1877, immigrants are living on the Lower East Side in the tenement communities. Tuberculosis is contagious. Someone comes up with an idea that what if we connect our kids on the Lower East Side who are getting tuberculosis to families in suburban Pennsylvania who have a lot of open space, who can host them so they can breathe fresh air, right? Clever. They do that. Opportunity begins. It literally gives birth to, quote unquote, the Fresh Air Fund. 140 years later, we are still doing that same work. We are still connecting young people to opportunities, not to, quote unquote, breathe fresh air, although that happens too, but to really allow them to be part of experiences in the outdoors, right? And although tuberculosis isn't the public health crisis of today, I would submit that gun violence, gang violence, asthma, unfortunately, unsafe streets, not enough spaces, not enough opportunities, unequal education, right? Those are the public health crises of our time. And so we are as relevant, I believe, I submit, the Fresh Air Fund is as relevant today as we were 140 years ago. 25 years ago, the Fresh Air Fund created a program called the Career Awareness Program. It was way before we were ever talking about this, actually. And just to be fully transparent, it was funded by Mariah Carey. So we have a camp named Camp Mariah, famous to lots of people. Folks know this. Maybe someone here has attended the program or knows someone who has, or has worked there. because that's what happens. Everywhere I go, someone's like, I did it. And so just a little shout out. But 25 years ago, this idea of helping our young people from our communities, we serve New York City children, we have consistently in our low-income communities, connecting them to career exploration, job shadowing, career fairs, right? The Fresh Air Fund is privately funded, so we haven't used any public dollars to do this. Kids have been connected to opportunities where they then get internships, where they then learn how to write resumes, where they then are transferred into a college connections program. There's academic support. There's all that kind of good stuff. So that's one model, right? But there's a whole host of models that folks around here know and that are probably running in your respective organizations. Whether it's some of the more contemporary stuff around coding that's happening, and connecting kids to that experience. I remember when Citizen Schools came to New York City and was working in middle schools, and they were connecting professionals who were coming in sort of in the after-school space and running a program in some schools to help kids see different opportunities. There's an incredible array of opportunities. I would say the city has invested in a lot of these opportunities, right? Ladders for Leaders, this summer youth employment opportunity that many of our young people experience, the work that PASE is doing right now with college students. Pinkerton is in the room. Pinkerton has funded hundreds, thousands of opportunities. The Pinkerton Foundation has funded thousands of opportunities, whether it's at the New York Hall of Science or the New York Academy of Medicine, whether it's actually funding internship programs, futures and options, right? There's so much happening right now on the ground, investing in our young people. We may not need a coordinated strategy, but we definitely need to understand our return on investment, right? A lot of money, actually Lucy Friedman said this to me yesterday, $500 million, $500 million in New York City is being invested in this kind of youth workforce frame. Do you see that outcome in your results? Because that's a lot of money. And we could really be doing something more thoughtfully about it, right? Lifting best practices, encouraging all of you to be more creative. But that's what I would say is a model of some of what we're doing, but also some of what you're all doing, right?
Do you want to comment on that, Jonathan? And can I ask you in particular, as you look at how we invest in youth programs to try to accomplish the range of goals that we've just articulated, is how do we break down the investment as it relates to workforce development, exposing folks to professional tracks, versus investing in their social and emotional health, which is a different kind of project, recognizing that in fact the economy's changed. It's changed many times in my adulthood. We know people have many more different careers, not just different jobs, but oftentimes multiple careers over the course of their adulthood. And so how do we prepare them for that?
Right. Those are some really great questions, important questions, and I think they're complicated. I want to go back to some things that Fatima was saying at the very beginning around exposing people. I think that what research I've seen, work experiences at a young age or as a teen does seem to pay off later in life, and I think the more we can give people work experiences of any kind, I think it's helpful. Whatever you all thought about the Amazon situation that we all kind of went through for a few months in New York City, one of the things that really depressed me about that was that I just got a sense that not a lot of people around the city saw themselves ever getting an Amazon job. It just never seemed like within the realm of possibilities for a lot of New Yorkers. And I think that that's part of the exposing that I think has to happen at a young age, that people have got to see this as a career path, as a possible career path. And so, when I think about exposing people, a lot of it is like around youth programs, like the youth workforce programs that are invested in, that have some connection to career skills, pathway, or things that they're learning in schools. So, just honestly, we've looked a little bit at youth workforce programs over the years, and a study we did about 7 or 8 years ago was pretty critical of the summer youth employment program. I guess we raised some questions about how much can you really do with a 6-week program And I think that to the city, to this administration's credit, I think they've really improved it. I think that they have connected it more to classroom experiences. I think they've gotten in a lot, kind of more diverse range of employers into the program. I love that they've expanded ladders for leaders, which I think is a little bit of a deeper engagement in the workforce. I think those things have to continue. I also think, to my point earlier about, not only Amazon, but where the economy is going, that we need to have more exposure to technology, not only technology skills, and I don't mean computer science from the age of 5, but I think that there's a lot of things that can be done where, we're looking right now some research around computational learning, where you really just kind of, try to, use basic computing in a lot of different things that are taught. So, just kind of integrate computing with, just art and so many other things that are being done. And I think that, it has to start at a young age. Like if we as a city think that we're all of a sudden going to diversify the tech jobs in New York City with people that are unemployed right now or people that are in their 30s and 40s, it's challenging. It's challenging with workforce development to all of a sudden bring people into these highly technical jobs in technology. Some of it should and can be done, but we've got to start much earlier. And that's why when you ask about programs that are doing good things, I think that there are some things out there like Girls Who Code, and Fatima mentioned other kind of coding programs. There are other programs like I think what Fresh Air is doing around just getting people the opportunity to have experiences where they're using their hands, where they're creating things, where they're tinkering. They don't have to be in tech. They can be in science. They can be in art. But giving people those opportunities to be creative, to tinker, I think are things that we have to be doing more of. And I think that organizations out in communities should look to partner with those organizations and also should look to, where possible, bring in people from the private sector, bring in entrepreneurs every once in a while to talk to young people and explain what they're doing so they can see mentors, so they can see pathways at an early age. You don't have to necessarily give somebody an internship at Google at the age of 10, but maybe you bring in someone from Google and talk about what they're doing every once in a while, and I think that could help.
Can I just add? I think, when we think about examples, right, we all know this perhaps if you know the kind of learner that you are. Experiential learning is everything, right? And so, unfortunately, not enough creativity, I fear, is infused into the traditional learning day, right? And that's why the after-school space becomes so important, because that's where the project-based learning becomes really heightened, where the experiential piece, right? So you can do your drama program, you can do your music program, you can do a dance program, you can do your mock trial or debate, right? So all of these opportunities start to get introduced in that out-of-school time space. In the summer, and some examples of things that are happening, right? We have really large institutions across the city who can handle and help support some really creative ways to engage our young people, right? So the largest employer of young people in the Bronx is the Bronx Zoo. And they currently run, for 14 and 15-year-olds, models of both volunteerism, connecting them to ways to be in the zoo, learning alongside a professional with a stipend. And then they also are doing summer youth employment with more coordinated roles. I used to work at Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn. Maimonides also, we had over 400 high schoolers who spent the summer in our departments, some of whom were on stipends, some of whom were on SYEP, right? There are real opportunities to connect young people to truly seeing the work in action and being a part of something, right? And I think that helps young people understand and pique their greater interest in both their value, their confidence, their presence in the learning environment, and interest for what comes next. And so that connection, I would say, we have to invest in more deeply.
And can I ask you, you sit in different spaces, but you both have a kind of perch where you have a bird's eye view of things, a little bit at least. And I wondered if you could position New York City against other parts of the country, or your sort of sense of, where is the leadership for this? Are public officials behind this in a way that they may not have been previously? Business leaders, the philanthropic community, the academic community. How do you see this all taking shape in New York, and how does it look relative to other places you keep an eye on across the country?
I think that on the one hand, I think young people in New York are fortunate because we have a strong economy. In this economy, we're seeing a handful of places, a handful of cities really reap the benefits, and New York City is one of those places. The job growth is through the roof. It's a diverse economy. There's a lot of different opportunities. I think we need to figure out how to get more young people, particularly those from lower income communities, on those pathways. I think that from a public sector point of view, there's been some important investments. I think Fatima mentioned some of them, like the pretty significant investment in summer youth program and Ladders for Leaders. The program has almost doubled, I think, in the last 5 or 6 years. There's been innovation in CUNY in programs like ASAP, which is really one of the best programs in the country for making a difference around college completion. So even what I mentioned earlier, there are some important things happening that are putting us on the right track. I think we should do a lot more with that, but there is that innovation happening there. I think that there are some innovative models with career and technical education that are happening at like the Navy Yard and the STEAM Center that's being created, where like they're kind of doing a place-based model of workforce development, partnering with high schools in Brooklyn to bring young people to learn specific skills that are needed by the companies at the Navy Yard, and in many cases leading to internships for young people at those Navy Yard companies. So I think there's some things happening, but we just have to, do it at a much greater scale. On a lot of those kind of coding and tech programs that I talked about, the numbers are incredibly low. There's great programs out there, but we've got to figure out how do we scale them up. I do think that institutions like CUNY, like the public libraries, like the schools, and like after-school organizations are going to be so critical. I think we need to figure out how do we take the really positive gains that we've seen in universal pre-K, but figure out how do we complement that with the learning that is allowed to take place outside of the schools. So we've, for instance, been a big advocate around the public libraries. There are 216 branch libraries around the city. They're pretty much in every neighborhood in New York City. They're trusted institutions by so many folks. They're very accessible, and increasingly libraries are going beyond just offering like story time for kids, but also to have kind of slightly deeper learning programs, like in Queens, the kindergarten to college program. So I think that the more we do those things, I think that we're going to be better off. But, the city and the state have so much more to do around the college completion issues that I talked about. That's got to become a massive priority. So far, it is not.
I think New York is so large, sort of comparing to what's happening in other places. I think that there are such great examples of things that are happening here, right? So in the Bronx, coordinated by Borough President Ruben Diaz with the Judy and Jamie Dimon Foundation, created or coordinated with the Bronx Private Industry Council a series of opportunities for high school students, right? That's an example that's affecting over 200 kids. What does scaling look like in that reality? And then in different parts of the city in general, what else could happen? I think many places look to New York to learn from New York. And so, not that we should not be looking elsewhere to learn as well what might be happening and what creativity could be happening. But I believe our city is doing some really great things. I just think we need to figure out how do we invest more deeply, how do we lift some of these great models, how do we challenge ourselves to be more innovative, right? On an education frame, we continue to do things in a bit more of a traditional lens, right? How does this get us to high school graduation? What is this going to mean for the Regents diploma? All hugely important. But for our overage and undercredited students, we've created a unique model that allows and recognizes that perhaps the learning environment requires and should include a learning to work component, because our young people either need it or it can complement their learning experience. And so that's been hugely successful for our transfer schools. How do we use that and think about that in different ways? Career and tech ed is a great example of that. How do we do that in a more robust way that can fundamentally help pipeline our kids to success?
Let me ask Jonathan, I'm going to take the bait because I work at CUNY and you've invoked us now 6 times and talked about, the challenges we face in seeing our students through to completion. And they're serious, and I think we're all focused on that. But I think you're making a set of, you're offering some observations that would have us make interventions far before students get to college, right? And I guess I wondered if you, and I know a lot of folks here are focused on that period in young people's lives, in the K through 12 period. And I guess I wondered if you could connect the dots for folks in a practical way of what we could be doing more to prepare students so that they will succeed. Understanding that CUNY's got a number of things it should do institutionally as well.
Right. Well, I'm not going to stop dropping CUNY on there.
Keep going.
I've got to say that I really think that CUNY is one of the most important institutions in New York City. I think it's only going to be more important if we are going to scale up some of these things that I've talked about, some of those workforce development efforts, for instance. CUNY is the only game in town. And I really do believe that CUNY is probably the most important springboard to the middle class for New York City right now. So I can't say enough about CUNY, but there absolutely is a need to improve outcomes, and not just at the community colleges, but definitely at the community colleges. And I guess what I would say is that a challenge to everybody in this room, to city officials, is that we know where the economy is going. I've already mentioned some of the stats right now where young adults are already struggling in this economy, a great economy. It's only going to be magnified going forward. So I would say we need to start with the goal of greatly increasing college completion and the number of people that are in their young years today that are going to get a college credential of some kind in the next 10, 15 years or so. And how do we get there, and what is everybody's roles? I think that CUNY has a lot of things that they can do. I think policymakers need to take this on as a real priority. I think that just to the same kind of focus that we had over the past 12 years or so around improving high school graduation rates, we've got to give to improving college completion rates in New York City. And it's not just CUNY, but CUNY can do, we know that ASAP is working in such a positive way. The graduation rates in college are like triple for those that are in the ASAP program.
Can I just ask, does everybody know what ASAP is? Okay.
And what ASAP does, it provides these wraparound services, a free Metro card, mandatory advising for students. We know that life happens for a lot of people, and ASAP tries to go in and make those interventions and stay with people on a weekly basis to make sure they stay in and get the advising and help they need so that they can continue. Right now, only about half of all students at community colleges are in the ASAP program. We can expand that. I think we can do more in CUNY to not dump so many young people in remedial education programs. A lot of folks are not prepared necessarily academically when they get into CUNY. They don't place into kind of a normal first-year program, but a lot of the evidence suggests that if you get placed into a remedial program, you're almost certainly going to drop out. And a lot of innovators across the country are getting rid of that. They are no longer putting people just in that remedial model. There are ways that we can provide services and supports in those early months and first year that allow people to get into a regular track, but getting additional supports as they do so rather than tracking them in a remedial model. I think at the high school level, the problem with a lot of students that go to CUNY is they're not ready academically, and so our high schools and middle schools need to do so much more to get people to be college ready. And I think all of us at a very young age need to have those conversations with young people about the importance of post-secondary today. I think we need to make sure that they don't see a high school diploma as the end line, but see that getting some kind of college credential is really what they need to be working towards, and there's a lot more that has to happen in high school to get there. We noted in our recent research about CUNY's graduation rates that there are a lot of the issues that stem from high schools. There's not many college-going advisors at our high schools in New York City to give people, to help them navigate, to help them understand what their options are. Then a lot of people trip up when they decide they're going to go to CUNY, but they never end up making it. Sometimes they get in, but they drop out in that summer before they enroll. A lot of people struggle getting access to the financial support, that the forms and others to get financial help. Our financial aid formulas in New York State could be so much better. A lot of people end up getting financial support from the state or from the federal government, but then they get kind of thrown off of that support before they are able to graduate. I think a lot more needs to be done. There are some great community-based organizations around the city that are focused on college success, that are intervening and helping young kids along the way as they progress and persist in college. I think that more organizations could be doing those things to make sure they stay with their young people after the high school age through college to give them that helping hand that they probably need.
I just want to say, I want to make sure we are mindful of language, because I think college is an incredible reality for many of our young people, but it might not be the only reality, right? And so I want us to just remember a little the diversity of our communities and the diversity of the learning experience and opportunities, because I think it would be helpful to help our young people in our communities understand where are there going to be jobs, what do they pay, what do they look like. New York City sees millions of tourists annually. More than half of New Yorkers speak a language other than English at home. Are we helping our young people understand that their language acquisition, their multilingual reality is employable, right? Are we telling our young people that, in fact, with that really extraordinary linguistic competency, they can be part of this really rich tourism industry that this city has, right? We're going to have a teaching crisis in the coming years because we don't have enough young people choosing a path of education, right? We, furthermore, are going to have a greater challenge around education because we don't have enough men choosing to teach in our classrooms, right? How are we telling our young people this is a pathway, and here's what it looks like to get there, here's what success looks like, right? So part of what while we know all of this, and I am a CUNY grad from this great institution, one of the things we have to do is parlay. You asked the question before, what is it going to take? It's going to take leadership, to be really honest, right? It's going to take real, thoughtful leadership and focused, with all due respect, focused on our city, perhaps, leadership that allows us to really focus on the needs today of what our young people have to be doing, right? What do our schools need to be focused on? What do our schools in connection with CUNY need to be focused on? Because we're creating formulas without actually understanding, in my opinion, some of the opportunities. I'll just say it again. We don't know what we don't know, right? So if I only know that I could be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, the bank teller, right? That's what I see. If I don't know that there are all these awesome jobs within a bank or in the finance space, that are all these awesome jobs within the legal framework, all these awesome opportunities within theater or film or tourism, if our young people don't see that, right, so where does that exposure happen, then they don't know what they're pursuing, and they don't know what they're going to need to pursue that. So I think we've got to create the sort of, how do we get there, right? We know what we want, but how do we get there? And there are some models, and there's money. We just need to be brave about it, right? We ask young people all the time, choose courage, try something new, choose courage. Perhaps New York needs to choose courage.
Can I just respond? Because I absolutely agree that there are multiple options and pathways out there. I mentioned at the outset, we've written about apprenticeship programs, and there are some great programs in New York City for folks that don't have a college credential to get into apprenticeship program, and they are amazing ladders to good paying jobs. There's only a few hundred of those at most in New York City right now. We should be expanding those. We've called for that. The CTE programs, career and technical education programs, they are important models. There's a number of good CTE programs. I think that we need to make improvements in our CTE programs. I don't think enough of them are really partnering with employers in a meaningful way and providing the kind of real-time skills that are needed in those fields. But I think that CTE programs are a great model. I think that employers need to stop making college a requirement for all sorts of folks that they are hiring. There's a lot that employers need to be doing differently. I think it's sometimes hard, particularly for smaller, mid-sized companies. A lot of the tech companies in New York are smaller and mid-sized, and for them, a lot of them don't have a big HR staff, and hiring somebody that has that college degree is just the easiest thing for them to do at a time when they're looking to hire so many people so quickly in a really intense, highly competitive industry. But all of that said, to me, I've just looked at the research again and again, and for so many people, we ought to be thinking about the pathway to getting some kind of college credential. Not necessarily an associate's, not necessarily a bachelor's, but something. CUNY should probably do more with certificate programs. There are very few certificates out there. We've talked about increasing those kind of things. But when you look at where the economy is going, I mentioned the fastest growing jobs that pay $50,000 or more, all of them are going to folks with at least an associate's degree, mostly with a bachelor's degree. I absolutely agree there are lots of options out there. We have to be expanding those. But we need to make sure that much more New Yorkers are on the path to a college credential.
How do we get there?
So Fatima just asked, how do we get there? And I guess, and let me pose that question to the two of you in a slightly changed form, which is how do the folks in this room become a part of the project of getting us there, if that's what we want to strive for. I know we have a diverse range of organizations represented in this room, but if the project is one about training our young people or exposing our young people to the professional paths of tomorrow and today, and then preparing them for the kind of skill development that's going to be necessary, whether that be college degrees or something else, it's going to require leadership. And we've talked in general terms about where there may be leadership, where there may be momentum. But as a very practical matter, if the folks in this room want to be a part of that project, what's your sense of where the momentum is and how you join that project?
I think as someone who has college access and college persistence programs in my organization and believe strongly in them, and in the importance of us providing support to our young people and their families through the college process, because it is cumbersome no matter what and who you are going through the process. Add to that any number of other factors, and it makes things much more difficult. But I believe that we need to ensure our young people are exposed to opportunities so that they know what they're pursuing. It's hard to get excited about calculus if you don't know why you need it, right? The number of times, right, I have a 15-year-old son who loves to tell me, I don't know why I need living environment. You just need it, right? That's not a good enough answer, right? And so, but our young people are asking that question, right? Why do I need this class? Why do I need this? Why do I have to be here? Why does school matter? And it matters because we have to help them understand the importance of the persistence in today so that we can have the better outcomes for tomorrow. So I think all of you play a role in that because you're on the other side, right? You're closer to our communities. You're closer to our young people. You likely are hearing their very conversations about this. We at the Fresh Air Fund employ about 600 young people every summer to work with us serving kids, ages 18 to at least 24, 26. They spend a solid week and a half in orientation in preparation for working with us. I would say it's the greatest demonstration of what I've observed as preparing our young people for the 21st century skills, right? It's team building, it's conflict resolution, it's communicating, it's preparing a curriculum for what you're gonna do, right? Are we doing that with enough of our young people to help them understand the persistence it's gonna require in the next stages? It would be awesome to hear a little of folks that are in the room, sort of some examples of either what you think folks should be thinking about at the city level, or ways that leadership could be applied towards this.
On that note, we actually are gonna open it up for either comments or questions. And before I do it, I'm gonna ask, we're gonna do that in just a second. So we've got 2 microphones on either side, and I would invite you either to come up and share your thoughts on what we're talking about, or to pose a question. And we'll have time for only probably a couple, but would love to hear from you. But let me pose one last question, though, as folks think about their own, and that is about the particular political moment we're in. You know, when I sort of think about the workforce of development, one of the things I think about as a dean at City University is about the tremendous asset we have to offer in the diversity of our students. But we also find that, you know, I just spent the last 8 years until I became dean living in Washington, D.C. We also are in a political moment in which we seem to be fractionalized, euphemistically, over diversity, about its assets, and about this political moment, and in all kinds of interesting ways that our young people are observing and absorbing and are affecting the ways I think they think about their potential and their opportunities going forward. And I wonder how that affects the work that people in this room are doing, how they address it, how they make sure that it is not left out of the conversation, and how we think about it in an intentional way.
So I would say that this political moment is very worrisome, right? Because I think, to me, there's the opportunity to make sure our young people are prepared to actually be the solution for the future. And so civic engagement and that reality of activating our young people is critical. This moment and this attack, if you will, on the immigrant communities of our country is horrific at best, right? And how are we ensuring in our communities that our young people matter is so important. And in this city, it's incredible because we hear it, right? We see it. But it is still this overlay of language and fear tactics and, you know, a young person's ability to come to be a part of a summer youth employment program is layered with fear because perhaps they're in a mixed status household and they are afraid of whether they will come home and find their parent or not, right? The reality that too many of our families are not pursuing benefits, whether it's at a local food pantry or healthcare access, because they're afraid of what that means, right? Snowball that to census, right? And the reality that if we do not do the right thing and figure out how to make and help our communities, or not make, but help our communities feel comfortable filling out the census, the implication of the loss of money and representation in this city for a generation could be pretty tragic, right? A 6-year-old today will be 16, and all the services that we need to help that young person thrive, to get to the space that Jonathan is talking about, can be lost. So we're in a really intense moment, and I'm not an alarmist, right? So I don't want to go there, right? I'm a much happier solution operator. So we all need to get into the space of solutions for how we are going to lift our young people. Because this is a moment that they, in my opinion, more than ever, are going to take us forward, right? We've got to ride this out, but they have to be the leadership forward. And so it's happening, right? Whether it's the investment that several foundations are doing. I know that Brooklyn Community Foundation's been doing this awesome investment in youth activism around Brooklyn at large with a number of great community-based organizations working in the immigrant communities. A lot of investment. Safe Passage project that's really stepped forward to work on legal services for undocumented young people has been huge. but it doesn't end there, right? Whether our youth voice matters, all of you know this, they tell us. Their voice matters, and we have to activate them. So as we're talking about their graduating school success, with high school diploma successfully, getting into that next pathway, their voice today truly matters for what we need our city to be prepared for, but really for our country.
I don't think I can add to that.
Okay.
It's great.
That's pretty good. Let's open it up. We have a little bit of time left, and I invite anyone who has a question to go to one of the two microphones or a comment. We'll start over here.
I'm a former public school teacher at an elementary school in Brooklyn and current community school director working in Queens. I never hear enough about what we're doing in elementary schools. It's always about high schools and maybe middle schools. So I really want to know what we think we should be doing in elementary schools to get kids ready to be in the world one day as an employee, as a college-going person. What are we doing for the young people?
I'm not an expert on this, but I do have one thought about this. My organization is working on a study right now that's looking at mapping all of the tech training programs in New York City that are helping New Yorkers get on the path to technology jobs. And I have to say that in the 4 or 5 months or so as we've been doing this research and we looked at all this, and it became increasingly clear to me at least that starting for those adult workforce programs was way too late. That only doing computer science for all was way too late. And I think that when you talk about elementary schools, I think it's absolutely where we need to start with introducing and exposing young people to computing, to technology, not necessarily with computer science, but introducing it, exposing it, wrapping it around a lot of things that we're teaching so that by the time they get to middle school or high school, they don't think this is not for them. That they feel comfortable with this, and it's not a lost hope. And so, I think that's one thing that I would say. And as we've been doing this research, we decided to include kind of a map also of what's happening in these lower grades and kind of the K through 12, not just K through 6, but all sorts of programs that are doing computational learning or computer science or coding. And I think that there are some interesting models that absolutely need to be scaled up. And I also think that there probably should be professional development for teachers and perhaps for after-school instructors. If you guys are going to be introducing young people to computing skills or technology, we may need to make sure that more of our teachers and instructors out there know what they're talking about.
I'm going to go to creativity, right? Because the elementary school stage is all about the love of learning, right? So if we are in a school building that does not engage in restorative practices and discipline is the only thing we know, the love of learning is dead, right? And so that's why the after-school space is so powerful, because the love of learning gets re-energized in that after-school space. We really do need to rethink how do we invest in our elementary space really around the love of learning, right? It is incredibly sad to see how a child thinks reading a book is a form of punishment, right? Not a joy, not an escape, right? That's right. Our library systems, which are brilliant, have to then contend with that. And that's happening in what many of us think is that most sacred time in a child's life, right? It's a safe space. It's an engaging space, but if it's not a positive space that is investing in our young people and their normal childhood development, right now I'm speaking as a mother, right? I pity the fool who doesn't give my child what I think they deserve, right? Every parent wants that for their child, unequivocally, right? I submit that every parent wants that for their child. What are our partners in the school building doing to ensure that, right? And that's around the restorative space. Are we investing in joy for our kids, right? Are we investing in hope of what looks awesome and what can be achievable? And so in some ways, we need to get back to happy, right? The school day should just be for, kindergarten should be joy, and first grade should be joy, and second grade should be joy, and third grade should be joy and not tests, right? And fourth grade, I get it, tests matter. I don't want to sound like I don't understand that, and they do, and our kids need to experience that. But how are we investing in their joy so that kids are really excited about learning because that sets them up for success, right? The commitment to curiosity is always going to help us get to the next stage. So computating can easily be done in so many great learning ways.
Yeah.
Hi, I have a comment that's looking for a solution. Jonathan, you talk about college retention. There are many in this room that are doubling, tripling those numbers, but they're doing it with private philanthropy, and that's not sustainable. So my question is, how do we sustain the incredible work that community-based organizations are doing that benefit DOE, that benefit CUNY, and just aren't getting paid for it? For instance, College for All, right? You had the student success centers in schools that these amazing community-based organizations are doing so successfully that my understanding is being defunded. So we can say do more, right, at the hands of these folks, but we got to pay for it, and private philanthropy just doesn't have the money. So frustration, solution.
Well, it's a great point, Lori. Like I said, when we did our study about college completion about a year and a half ago, I wrote an op-ed which was basically saying, the headline was basically, Mayor de Blasio, make college completion the next plank of your inequality agenda. And as I've alluded to earlier, I think one of the things that we ought to be doing, whether it's this mayor or the next mayor, is to really set a goal of greatly increasing college completion and persistence and looking at and making a plan or many plans for how do we get there over the next decade and what partners does that involve. Yes, there are things that CUNY can do and that the city can support CUNY doing, but absolutely community-based organizations have a huge role to play in that. Many of them are already doing an amazing job, and as you're saying, without the resources to really make it work or do more. And so they have a huge role to play. I guess what I would say is this has got to be one of the big priorities for our city going forward, and especially at a time when automation is coming down the pike, even more that's got to be a priority. So what are the 5 or 10 things that the city ought to be taking steps to do to get there? That involves the K through 12 schools, it involves community-based organizations, it involves libraries. How are we going to get there, and what are those specific things? I think we need to make a real detailed strategy and provide the resources to help us get there.
We have time for just one more question, sir.
Hi, my name is John Reddick, and I'm the founding board member for Harlem Link Charter School. I just want to give some examples of we're pre-K to 5th grade. One of the things you didn't mention is our environment. It's so important, our environment. Our students did a partnership with Parks, and they got out in Martin Luther King Park and cleaned the park before Parks Department got there. Parks Department was like, oh my God, and the kids were so happy, okay? Environment is very important, and it's a field that is unexplored, and we do not take enough value in it in New York. Also, at particular times, knowing people's culture. One boy, I heard him say one day, white people have no soul. I said, okay. I said, you're going to have lunch with me today. I got him a bagel with lox and cream cheese and raw onion. And I said, this is Jewish soul food. I went to Brooklyn College, okay? So, I know. And he ate that. He was like, wow, white people do have soul. I just have to tell you, there's certain ways that schools are making that emphasis for our young people at the little age of, pre-K up to 5th graders. I do not know about the computer. I'm clueless. I'm 67 years old, and kids hear me go, oh, I can't figure this out. They go, Mr. Reddick, can I help you? Letting them help me builds their confidence. And I just wanted to let you know, we are trying to work with our younger people.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and for sharing this story. I think it's a good note to end on. Thank you, Fatima. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Thank all of you for all the work you do. Alice, and thank you for letting us be here and hosting.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Can we say thank you once again to our panelists? This is really enormously helpful and interesting. And I do happen to know you can get on Jonathan's mailing list for all these future reports, because I'm on it, and it helps keep informed on a lot of the forward-looking data that we need and that sort of thing. Fatima's Fresh Air Fund website also has some really great case studies of programs that we're doing. And clearly, we need to be looking at the Colin Powell School as partners in our work as we think about future policymakers, undergraduate and graduate. So lots of good connections here. I'm also struck, though, and just as a planting a seed, panelists, that we should probably take you on the road for some of our other partners that are needed, notably our corporate community, who I think has a real role to play as we think about workforce development, should be investing in us now, starting in little people and going up to a little bit older people, to make sure that we actually can connect the dots in ways that are going to make the difference in young people's lives. So again, thank you to the panelists. Much, much, much appreciated.